I'd like to ask my four first speakers to come up onto the stage here, if I could, to be part of a short panel. We've probably, as I say, got about, I don't know, 20 minutes or so to finish off this afternoon. And I'm sure there are lots of good questions. Let me just start off with one for all of you, actually, but I will maybe ask initially for the question to be handled by Matt, but others I'm sure will have an opinion, which is really about the fact that, you know, as we move into this world when we've gone from, I mean, some of this stuff really looks science fiction versus, you know, what we saw just a few years ago. We know the amount of processing capability that Hossein talked about originally has really changed things. But potentially there is some question here about privacy that I think Shane actually referred to, you know, as to whether there is really an issue here. I mean, do we think this is a market that needs, you know, some kind of regulation? Do we think there is the necessity for government to look at this in any way, or is this a market that needs to develop? So I don't know whether you want to take that one first, given your image processing background first of all, Matt, and then maybe pass it on to the others, or?
Yeah, I mean...
Sorry, I didn't mean Matt. I apologise for that, I meant Stewart, but anyway, carry on. Carry on. No, Matt, you go ahead. You've obviously got an opinion, so apologies. Apologies, my fault.
Sorry. I mean, from my own perspective, I think... to some extent, it's a bit like CCTV in that, you know, when CCTV kind of first emerged, what, 10, 15 years ago, there were huge issues to do with privacy. And, you know, people addressed that in very different ways. But I think the problem was solved not really by legislation. Legislation was a secondary thing that solved it. I think the thing that actually solved the problem was the fact that people need to make money. And therefore, companies actually solved the privacy issues themselves by actually developing products in such a way that they did not infringe people's privacies. I mean, I can remember sort of 15 years ago when CCTV was first being deployed around London, and people would be worried about, oh, you can see into my bedroom and all this kind of stuff, and therefore companies then reacted by creating regions of interest and blanking out regions of interest. So I think in a lot of these things, yes, there are issues. Yes, we need to be mindful of it, but I don't think legislation should first address it. I think that's a big stick. And commercial reality will probably start to address it first. Mm-hmm. Legislation may follow, but I think it will follow.
Okay. Matt, did you have a view on that? I'm sorry for putting you on the spot before. But,
yeah.
Go on, Matt.
I've got to get Matt's opinion on this, I mean, ultimately.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, that's pretty much what I was going to say. One of the... so well done. But one of the big things that, well, personally, you know, I've seen recently, and we've all seen, is the stuff that's happened around the anti-piracy laws in the UK. Yes. And actually that's been some of the biggest infringements into people's private data, you know, what they look at on the internet, you know, what they download, what they share. And that's now being shared very publicly. So I think regulation very often can almost have a worse impact than letting the industry itself self-regulate. So that'd be my comment as well.
Any other comments? Any difference?
Mine's not so much privacy. One of the things that came out of the two-pack thing that I showed you earlier on was an ethical question. And it's, is it right to repurpose people who aren't here, who don't have a say in it? And my answer to that is, as a platform, it's not really going to be us to decide that, but the two people who have had experience of this, one was Tupac's mother, and she loved it. And the other chap, who I don't think, if you picked up on that, there's a guy called Paul Arden, who was the creative director for Saatchi & Saatchi. And when his family came in, he passed away 2 years before he was on stage for a Saatchi & Saatchi convention. And the family's only comment was that he wouldn't have had a Windsor tie knot. And they really bought into it. So not quite privacy, but a different issue, I suppose.
Well, I think the thing that came up in the innovation session this morning was, I think, also the perception that people's, you know, not only is the technology changing, people's behaviour is changing. You know, the propensity for people to want to share information on Facebook and so on has changed. You know, some of the standards, if you will. So I think it's very difficult. One of the challenges of legislation is it's relatively slow and cumbersome, and it's almost out of date before it's implemented. So there's clearly a challenge in that way. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Hossein, yes, quick words.
I think as a technologist, I think my comment on this would be, as long as people know that the information is accessible by others, then that's fine. I think what I find a little bit concerning is you'll find young people on Facebook that don't even understand all that their data is accessible by everyone. Yes. I think the key thing is knowledge that the information is available to others. But the rest of it, I agree. I think
and I think transparency, again, was something that came up this morning as a key issue in there, that I think if you're transparent about what you're doing and what you're providing to people, people then have the ability to make some choice. I guess in the camera instance, I mean, they talk about now that if you go out for a walk in London, 100 different cameras will catch you. It's a little difficult then.
I think if you wait another few years, every car will have about 10 cameras on it, and it'll be capturing everything that is going on around it. So I think it's just going to get worse.
Okay, any questions from the audience? If you wouldn't mind just waiting for the microphone and just introduce yourself as well, if you could, just so that we can hear you on the web. And whatnot.
Hi, I'm Amy Lee and I'm from Magic Solver. It's a question about transparency, really. You're just saying that children don't know about these kind of privacy laws and so forth and what they're actually giving up when you interact with Facebook. Do you think there's a responsibility in more than just transparency, but taking it to another level and actually translating what that kind of translating the jargon for different types of people out there so that everyone understands what the implications of this are? So educating.
My comment would be absolutely yes.
Any no's in the panel? Anybody got any other views? No, I mean, okay, well, there you go. They're a very agreeable panel we have here, clearly. I mean, I guess it's a complex question, but also, I mean, I think those kind of language, and I think it's us as an industry have got responsibility to try and create, you know, language and accessibility in a much greater way that does make that particular problem feel less acute. Maybe we could carry on with our question, maybe come back if that's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think it's more of the opt-in versus the opt-out. Yep. Something specific around AR and the capturing of that, in my business in particular, is the ability then to opt in that you're captured. So do you think that the future of mass-scale public capture will be everybody is blurred until they opt in and then reveal themselves? And do you think that that's a good way to go?
Interesting.
Do you mean specifically from a sort of facial identification and face rec when you're walking? Is that
yeah, absolutely.
I think the difficulty and really the privacy issues kick in when you associate that face with either an online or an offline personality, and until that association's been made, I would probably argue that actually it's fairly anonymized data. You still need to be clear what you're doing with it, but it's fairly anonymized. But as soon as you cross that boundary in associating that particular face, and I say it doesn't really matter what type of identity it is, then I think you really cross that boundary and you have to be very, very careful. But that's really where I draw the association. So as long as it's anonymized or you know nothing at all about it, it's just a person in a blue jacket with a face. Once I know it's John Smith with a blue jacket and a face, that's quite different.
Okay. Well, maybe worth us just moving the discussion on a little bit from that particular area. And one of the things that was mentioned in passing by Prince Charles as he was there was the opportunity for video technologies to reduce carbon footprint. It's certainly something we talk a lot in Cisco about, you know, using telepresence and cutting down massively the amount of travel we do. I mean, you know, we had some great examples again from you, Matt, about the way people could do education differently and so on. How are you thinking about that whole area of, you know, people being in a different place when they're not there and being able to engage differently and so on? Is that an area that's interesting for you? If Matt could just do a little bit, because I think there was some, it would be really interesting just to get a bit of perspective for the education side of things. I think particularly was good.
Yeah, I mean, the education side is great for us, and we, I recently was at TED, and we met one of the, a great guy who was a TED fellow, and he kind of teaches about technology and education across the Middle East, and he just, you know, said a huge thank you because he is able to narrate books, narrate objects, narrate things that exist within the classroom, and give his personal kind of knowledge on them. And then distribute his app, powered by Aurasma, on these iPads and send them out to these other schools. So it is a way that he can effectively share his knowledge with these children without actually needing to be there.
Yeah. The Musion's not at the point where everything we do is completely green at the moment, because we need to take the technicians out to the site to set the thing up. But when we get our model of permanent installations right, and a big network up there, then there could be a dramatic drop-off in the amount of carbon that's being pumped around. I'm not a captain of industry yet, but there are plenty of them here today. And it's a lifestyle choice that I think Phil and Musion are offering up to say, do you want to go and fly halfway around the world for a day for a meeting, when actually you can really have a physical presence almost there by stepping up from your office into a little broadcast room, and then as soon as you're done, you're back at your workspace and interacting. So our technology I see as a green contributor, definitely.
Yeah, actually, it was interesting enough with Prince Charles. We had the exact example. He tried out telepresence, and and it was interesting. In the evening, it happened to be at some event we're at, and but when I looked at, I mean, his carbon footprint, obviously, if he had to travel, would have been less, but it was the fact he had 25 police with him, and there was people outside, and the roads were shut, and there was I mean, there was actually the carbon footprint, literally, of him coming from Clarence House to wherever it was in London, was probably gigantic, and so a simple video first of all, but then, more, real would have been very powerful, easier, cheaper, more secure, and so on. So there's clearly some interesting apps.
I can only comment about this as a potential user of this. Although I'm a technologist, I'm probably one of the top British Airways frequent flyers as well, and I travel maybe about 2/3 of my time around the universe. Now, my view of it is that if I look at my traveling, perhaps I can reduce it to half with good quality conferencing, etc., but you can't get rid of it, because there are times you're sitting. Business often has relationship issues.
Of course.
And it's all about going and having dinner with these guys, or a glass of wine, looking at the white of their eyes, or he wants to see the white of your eyes. Although, as the video conferencing gets better, you can see the white of the eyes. But I would imagine if I can travel 50% less, then that would be good. And I think that is very, very feasible. And I did use a Cisco telepresence system recently, and I definitely concluded it does.
I need to have a word with you, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. So,
no, fantastic. I mean, I agree, and I don't know if there's any other comments, but it is clearly an area I think that potentially will change the way people behave. Any other questions about technology or any other areas I'd like to cover?
Hi, Rich Walker, Shadow Robot Company. So this is slightly a loaded question. You've all ridden kind of technology curves down, Moore's Law type developments in various areas, and seeing the advances in video processing from what was possible 20 or 30 years ago is really, really impressive. What technologies haven't changed that would make a difference to what you're trying to do?
Yeah, that's interesting.
I can certainly, I think the biggest challenge that we have and our customers have is the amount of power that is available, because it's not actually so much power consumption, it's distributing power across a phone and making sure it discharges as much of it as possible. That's, to me, in fact, a lot of our development have been even more concentrating on making sure we do what we do with less power or the same power. I think that's the biggest challenge that I see.
Yeah. Anybody else got any other technologies? I mean, power's clearly a key one. I think that's, if we look at the number of mobile phones and batteries and whatever you have to charge these days, I mean, it really is a challenge. And although battery technology has evolved pretty enormously, it's still got a long way to go. And I know there's some really cool technologies in that area that will help out in the future. But I saw a lot of VCs talking about small companies a couple of years ago that were going to do, induction power and all that sort of stuff. But to be honest, I haven't seen a massive amount of it actually in the marketplace as yet. So, interesting area. Right. So clearly power's the answer. Any views yourself? Do you think there's any other technologies that are... No. No.
I think that there's another so completely unrelated one I can comment on. I think if you look at what's happened in the mobile phone space, people are ending up having to sell apps for $1 or 50 cents, which means the content that is created behind these things, you cannot spend a lot of money on. If you spend $50 million to create a content that then you have to give away at $1 each. Okay, if you sell 200 million of them, it's fine. If not, you have an issue. I think areas that will allow people to create really complex content at much lower cost with whatever technique, I think, is an area which would be enormously important for the future.
Yeah. There's another question. If just wait for a second, if you wouldn't mind.
My name's Gary Thomas from View the Water. We've seen lots of positive examples today, education, entertainment. What about using these technologies for negative things, or a sovereign state using it to manipulate people or send messages out? How can we do something to ensure that people know that what they are seeing is real when it needs to be real?
Interesting. So you mean manipulating the video in some sinister way or whatever, so that you think it's what it is?
Say something in Syria, and the rebels aren't actually bombing people or shooting people, it's actually
It's a tricky question. Take that tricky question over to
I mean, I can comment on that, not really from a slightly different twist on that. I mean, there are technologies out there which are essentially personalizing. I mean, from a brand sponsor perspective, I'll look at it from that. But there are certainly technologies out there today which are personalizing the brand that appears on particular broadcasts. So, for example, if it's an alcoholic beverage company that's sponsoring a particular football team, if that broadcast is then being broadcast into the Middle East, then in real time, that alcoholic beverage is being removed and something else being superimposed. So slightly different from what you've asked about, but it's there and it's doing things now, today, to start the sort of path that you're heading us down there.
Something came to my mind. One area that we are beginning to work on, plus I'm sure other people, is that to basically have security end-to-end as you compute through the devices. Yes. So I can imagine, in fact I'm pretty certain, in a few years' time, you will have devices or cameras that when they generate an output is completely encoded and secure. And if someone tampers with them, at least you will know there was a camera that took this picture and this picture is real. I mean, I'm sure that is something that will come. It will take a few years, but it will come.
Certainly. Just take the microphone there, that one.
I was doing this last week in Oman. I have an app on here that allows me to use our technology, just using since you've got Samsung here, the fantastic camera on the Samsung Galaxy 2, which allows me to take the picture. It connects automatically into the 3G network on a roaming SIM. And I just rang off the same phone a man in UK and said, press record. And as I'm traveling through the Straits of Hormuz, he is recording that picture. Now, I can pass this to a reporter, and we're now in discussions with some big news agencies to pass this technology to a reporter or a man on the street in Aleppo, and he can press that technology, and you can see what's happening in Aleppo live. Yeah. So all it matters now is disseminating that to people in those situations to validate what a government is saying or not, because you can see a live picture as well. So it's a matter now of how we pass that out and disseminate the technology.
Thank you. I think, I mean, that whole area of kind of digital fingerprinting and so on is clearly challenging, because clearly, right now people will accept an email, for example, as verification or something, and it couldn't be anything easier to fake than an email. There's a microphone there. There's a microphone there, just because they won't be able to
get an answer. I suppose, back to your point about CCTV sort of 10, 15 years ago, and obviously legislation came in to actually say whether, what the purpose of the CCTV was being used for, and whether it was biographical or not, and how that related to legislation. But if we're actually seeing something that's AR, is there a moral requirement to actually say that this image has been manipulated? Do you think that needs to be done in terms of, particularly in the broadcast space? Just a question.
I think it goes back to the principle of knowing what you're dealing with, and I think the answer to that would be yes too. I mean, the principle is clear.
No doubt. Any other questions? Yeah, got one from
Tudor Oil Technology Sector Head at KPMG. I've been really impressed by the innovation that I've seen in front on the stage today, and really blown away by some of your stuff. But the question I have is, what's your view on the sort of talent pool and ecosystem you have in the UK to help you on your next stage? Are you sort of content, or do you think there needs to be any changes?
You really want a response?
Absolutely.
I think often I get asked, you know, we're a company of 1,200 people and we're hiring 300 this year. And the biggest challenge facing the company isn't business, customers, etc. It's getting the talent. It's an enormous issue. But you know, we're doing as much as possible in terms of even going to schools and colleges, encouraging kids to, you know, go to computer science and don't go to the city, come and work for us and that kind of stuff. I think what is really needed is a sea change, even from the home onwards, to tell the youngsters that you know, technology is a great place to be, and we just don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
Biggest issue.
It was interesting, again, I think it was the Chancellor this morning, again, talking about where education sits. And again, from a very personal point with what we've tried to do with Musion, we ran a thing called Musion Academy, and it was about trying to get the next generation of fine artists and graphics people to start understanding the platform in its infancy. And we actually spent quite a bit of our own money in supporting that. But it paid off in droves. We've now got a great bunch of, they're now probably a year or two into their careers, and they are great fans of Musion, and it's done a great deal of good, and we've got an awful lot of content that we can show as a result of it. So from the creative side, I think London is really well placed with the next generation that are coming through. I think the support of where do we go as S's going to SMEs and further, if you believe what's being said this morning, it sounds very positive, and we're seeing certain movements with things like debt finance seems to be coming a little bit more available, certainly from a year or two ago. So I think there's a bit of a positive movement, but it's an uphill struggle all the time, isn't it?
I can't believe you didn't believe what's been said by politicians, James. I can't believe you don't believe what's been said by politicians. That's very remarkable.
I just add a little bit briefly. I mean, from our perspective, the issue is not so much the talent pool. We have a very, very close relationship with one particular kind of centre of excellence at University of Surrey, who are very strong in video imaging. And that essentially gives us a fast track to recruitment, and it's been very fruitful. I think where the issue comes for us is actually, you know, frankly, funding the not inconsiderable resources that it takes to actually get to where probably all of these companies have got to. And accessing that through the whole variety of finance mechanisms that are available is pretty tricky, and particularly for small companies. So I think in terms of a small company, I don't look at the resources as the issue. I look at the resourcing the resources as the issue. And that's not a government issue to solve.
I would agree with you, Tudor, in the implication. I mean, I think there is a massive skills shortage. I mean, in the ICT area alone, there's predicted to be 500,000 jobs over the next 5 years, you know, 100,000 a year, which, you know, are likely to be struggling to be filled. You know, and I think, as was mentioned this morning, a fundamental restructure of the whole education system. But I don't think it's the government's solution only. I think we as industry, and certainly as big companies, need to take some responsibility in doing that and helping. And in fact, what's happening in the ICT curriculum is being restructured, and there's a set of big companies, including us, who are actually helping to get real coding people from the games industry and others involved in actually creating real skill. People are interested in, you know, in actually creating the technology as well as being consumers of it, which I think is really important. So we'll probably get a chance for one more question if there is one. Anybody got one more question? There's one just to your right. Thank you.
Jeff Kaliski from Pixolve. In what, maybe a loaded question, but in what application area would you see the greatest near-term potential for the use of video manipulation, whether it's augmented reality or whether it's face recognition in the next 2 to 3 years?
Anybody got one?
Comments, general ones.
All right.
I think if you look at where the great success was achieved or opportunity in the phones was the user interface. And that's sort of in a reasonable state today. There's more to be done. But I would imagine the potential I see certainly in the handset and tablet market is in areas to do with computational photography and generally capturing data or video or images that you can then translate into a 3D world and do things with. I think exactly what the applications are, I can't put my finger on it, but I would say bringing the real world, you saw an example of that today, and the three-dimensional creative world together, I think is the biggest area for excitement for the next, certainly, 3-4 years, I would say. But I'm sure you may have even more to say about that.
Well, I mean, yeah, you know, and we went through some of the examples that I think are particularly relevant. You know, education is huge. There are so many applications within education, not just schools and universities, but just, you know, finding out what things are and what things do. Being able to understand things just by looking at them. But then entertainment is massive. You know, we have a huge games industry here. We have a big entertainment industry here, and obviously a very big one in the US. And one of the really great things about technology like this is it means that you can get really clever with the way that you create these experiences. And this sort of technology just helps. You know, it helps create immersive, amazing film-like experiences. We've got a guy who's created a short film inside our technology where you travel from one building to the next to get different parts of the story and kind of collect kind of like little coins along the way, you know, and it's really exciting. So for us, you know, those are the two main areas.
I wish mine were as exciting as that. Back in the boring world. For me, actually, the thing that I really think will open the floodgates in terms of our side of this is actually classifying objects quickly and easily. And I talked in my talk about kind of the bicycle over the bridge in London, and that object classification, doing it quickly, automatically, and making sense of the 300 million images a day that are being uploaded to something. That's a huge opportunity, huge commercial opportunity. But it has to be done automatically. And so for me, it's making sense of some of these images that will start to unravel some of the monetization and commercial opportunities there.
As a platform, what Musion talks about is an application almost anywhere. I'll leave you with my personal vision, and it might happen, it might not happen, but we can, with all of these technologies being driven on a Musion platform, we can revolutionise the high street. So we've been working with car configurators. Instead of having an out-of-town car store, you could drop something onto Oxford Street and somebody could come in and run through any iteration of any car and see it as though it's in front of them. Next door there might be a record retailer morphing into a coffee shop as an entertainment space. Next door to that there's a walk-in Kinko's version of TP banking with automatic tellers that you're seeing holographic images and you're talking to somebody rather than being on a telephone line. So I think trying to bring things back to the high street or the retail space is where Musion's exciting applications could be. Who knows?
Thank you, James. Well, I mean, I think overall, you know, it was a very visual session we've had here, and you know, was best demonstrated, I think, when we saw some of the things coming alive, from the things that Hossein talked about through to Matt's really great demonstration of augmented reality and what it can achieve in many areas. Stuart's, you know, clearly significant and capable technologies to try and you know, sort out some of the complexities of huge amounts of video, and then James giving us the kind of, you know, real entertainment side of things. As well as our two special speakers, Shane and Ian. Thank you very much for that. I'd just like you, if you could all thank the panel, first of all, that'd be great.